In this episode, I'm going to show how you can take an image like this and turn it into this. And this is a concept image that I provided for one of my clients to help them market this property. This is an add-on service that I provide for my real estate photography business that opens up an additional revenue stream. Now, it is a concept image, and so it is properly labeled, usually safe for most multiple listing services. Either way, that's up to the client to decide on how they're going to use it, but it's very common when they need to market a property that just doesn't show its best with photos, but they can show potential buyers the potential that this house could have. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting off in Lightroom Classic in the standard workflow, we can see this is a blended image. Started out with this image here, which is obviously too bright. Got an image here that is too dark, but blended together, then we've got something we can at least start with. And of course, this would also be provided to the client along with that concept image. Now, if you're not familiar with some of this exposure blending that I'm doing here, or just shooting exteriors in general, this is something that I do cover in my course on professional exterior photography. And as you may know, I've got courses that cover professional interior photography, expert editing, the exteriors, videography for real estate, and also business and marketing for real estate photography. And I've written best-selling books on real estate photography as well. And I have links to all that down in the description for this video. But moving along here to get this image done, first thing I've done after I've done the basic edits like I normally would for any other exterior shot, I've exported this out as a JPEG. The next step is we want to take this into Firefly and we want to get something that we can start using to fill in some of these areas that need a lot of love. A lot of stuff is really bad back here, and we also need to clean up the house quite a bit too. So after exporting this image, I've got a JPEG, and it's pretty high resolution too, so the customer can use this as they want, but it's very doubtful they will want to print from this. A lot of stuff that's going on back here with just a lot of clutter. It really hasn't been taken care of all that well. And this is something very common when you're shooting real estate photography. Not everything is Instagram worthy. So the next thing we want to do is go to Firefly. And of course, that's over at firefly.adobe.com. And this is where then you can generate images. You've probably seen me do this a lot on my various YouTube channel videos here. And we're going to do basically the same thing using a structure reference to get us something that is workable. So the first thing we want to do is select Firefly Image 3, that's their third iteration of this model. You could try to do this also, by the way, in Photoshop's new Generate Image feature that they have. It also incorporates Firefly 3, but it just doesn't work as well. I'm going to keep this in the same orientation, so it's going to be Landscape 4:3. It's not going to be the exact same size, but we're going to correct that. You'll see as we move forward in the tutorial here. The most important thing is that you want a composition reference. They used to call this a structure reference, and I am sorry if I misspeak from time to time because it used to be called something different, but nowadays they call it a composition reference. You can see that I've loaded that image in here, but what you would do is you would go to Upload Image, and then you would select the image. So we would be selecting that image as our reference image, and then we would say Open. Next is then to have a prompt that somehow describes what it is we're looking for. So I said a backyard of a house. The backyard is covered with grass. The house is made of white stucco. Now, we're not really after the house, but we want to have something that matches it fairly close. So making sure that our composition reference is all the way over to the right, then you can click Generate. And that's what it did here. And then of course we can then download any images that we want. We can zoom in on them and see which ones we like. And there's 4 different iterations each time you do this, and I really liked this one. This is the one that we're going to be using in this tutorial. But if you're not happy with any of these, well, download them just in case you might want to use them, but you can just click Generate again. Doesn't take long. You might get some surprises here that it might be something better that you could use. So you do this enough times, and each time it does take a generative credit to do this, but sometimes the results are very worth it. Here we've got a few more results that came up, and they're not too bad. You can see one of the things it still does is put that group of plants over here. The patio may be workable once we get to that, but a lot of these are just different variations, so you can choose these as you like. Once you've downloaded those, then we can start working in Photoshop with both this and that other image that we exported originally from Lightroom Classic. And you can see that's what I've done here, and we're going to step through this from beginning to end. So we started out with this, and then we added some edits, and I made sure to add a label up here to say concept image. Now that's really up to your client if they want that or not, but I do suggest that to my clients if they'd like to have that. It keeps it safe for most of the listing services out there. So what we want to do is start this image, but not with the image that we exported from Lightroom Classic. Instead, what we want to do is drag in the image that we downloaded from Firefly, because that's going to be a much lower resolution image, and we want to use that instead. This is the image here that we're going to use. If you recall, that's the one that had a little bit of patio out here. This matched quite a bit. If we take a look at the size of that coming out of Firefly, we can see that it's definitely a lower resolution image, which has 2304 pixels wide by 1792 high. Anyways, what we want to do is start with this because our image out of Lightroom Classic is going to be much larger, and we'll just fit it in here. So let's drag this in. If you have no documents, you just drag it into Photoshop. Otherwise, with one document open, drag it up here to the bar, and you can see that it's not going to put it inside the image. By dragging it up here on the bar, it will then start a new image. Now, a couple things to make sure that this will work properly. The first thing we want to do is to make sure that we're working in the proper bit mode. So we want to go over to Image, Mode, and it's going to be defaulted to 8 bits because this was a JPEG, but let's put it to 16 bits because you might want to do a lot of other editing. That's the mode that you would typically have if you were going back and forth between Lightroom Classic and Photoshop, or even Bridge to Photoshop, because that keeps us with really good color and a lot of good sharpness. Detail will come out of this. Okay, so this is the start of our image, but we need to get the one out of Lightroom Classic in here next. And there is something that I do suggest doing here, that you make sure that the DPI does match. It's something that can confuse Photoshop. It's not that big of a deal, but a real simple one here is that knowing that we've got a 300 DPI image that was exported out of Lightroom Classic, let's do the same thing here. We'll go up to the image menu, and then we want to go to image size. When we're in there, this is typically where you would resize an image, but we don't want to necessarily resize it. Typically, resample is turned on. We don't want that turned on. We want that turned off, and we just want to then change our resolution here to match the same DPI that we had out of the image exported out of Lightroom Classic, and that was 300. Doing that, we can see that now it's still a 7-inch image, 7 by 5, which is big enough for the multiple listing service by any means. And then we'll just click OK. Now that's just a small thing to help Photoshop get over the next step, which is making sure that we center the image that we exported out of Lightroom Classic in here properly. And once again, here's that image. And by the way, if you did want to see the resolution on this, if you go to properties here, then I can see that this was 300 DPI. So anyways, having something matched, all I have to do now is drag this on top of that other image, and voila, it is now centered over top of that image. Now, you will see that there's still a chimney sticking up here and there's more grass down here. Don't worry about that, because this isn't necessary for the edits that we're going to do. Once this is dragged in there, you can hit the check mark or press enter. Now the next thing we want to do is to drag this layer that we have, which is our AI layer out of Firefly. We want to put it onto the top. Typically by default it's going to be locked, so you just click that locked icon and drag it up above it. Now it'll make it easier to work with, but first we want to make sure that everything is aligned the way that we want to. So let's drop the opacity of this down to about 50% or so, and then we can see how well this lines up. You can move the image around with the Move tool, which I selected up here by pressing V on the keyboard, and you can go up and down and see does that fit. And it does as far as the bottom of the house is and where the yard is placed. And we can see that if we zoom in here, this is what I'm looking for here. Is this lined up? Because that's where we're going to be putting in this other concept stuff. Okay. So that looks good. Let's change that opacity of that layer back to 100%, and then we'll add a layer mask to it by going up to Layer, Layer Mask, and then Hide All. Now before doing anything else, I just want to crop this down to size so that it's going to match the crop of our original image. So I'm going to use the crop tool over here. And by default, it should have the similar size. In this case, though, I selected 2:3. So I've got that resolution here. Fits real nicely. And then I'm just going to double click on it. And now our image is cropped. Okay, now we've got something we can start working with. What I do is select the mask over here on our AI layer, which is up here at the top. And we want to draw a polygon. So I'm going to grab the polygon lasso tool. And I'm going to draw a polygon around where I want to just start some of these edits. So I'm going to draw it like around here where this patio is. Go over here, and I don't care about these plants. I'm just going to drag something over there. It can just be real rough to start. Go over here, double click to close the polygon. Now on that mask, press Alt Delete or Option Delete if you're on a Mac. Okay, then Control D to deselect, or Command D if you're on a Mac. So now we've got something that is starting, but we have to fill in the rest of all this stuff here. So this was just a rough start, which is good. Now, let's start with some of the things like, for instance, the backyard over here. What I can do now is this is a mask. So if I want to remove some of this, well, I can just take the eraser tool, and with the eraser tool, and I'll use 100% flow on this, I'll just erase some of this out of there. Now, if that's too much, you don't like that, then you can then use a lower flow. Like if I used about a 30% flow, selected here, then I can decide if I want to then brush or erase some of this in there. So I could go back here to take that out of the eraser, and I could then say, yeah, let's just erase some of that out here, get that to blend maybe a little bit better to what we like. The other thing too is you can see there's a harsh line here where these plants are. And you have to decide, do you want the plants? And I'm doing a shift click on this mask so I can see what's before and after. I'm going to keep the original plants there. So I'm going to go in here 100%. That was just by doing Control 1 or Command 1 if you're on a Mac. And we're going to take that eraser tool once again, and I'm going to change its flow to 100%. I'll lower the size of it, and then I'll just go across the line where that was. And maybe I can erase even more. Same thing here for this plant. I can decide how much of this do I want to keep, how much of that do I want out of there. Now, I'm not too worried if a little bit of the AI plant is sticking out there. And you could also do object selection to get it really precise, but this is really all that we need for this. So let's take a look at where we are, where things started. So not looking too bad. I might though want to add in a little bit more over here. Once again, it's a mask, so I can take a brush and I'll just brush in then some of that over here. All right, once you're happy with that, take a look at some other stuff too. Like we can go over here and take a look. Does this make sense over here? Should I erase? Should I add some of that? And by doing shift click on here or just turning the layer off and on, then you can see what you might want to add. Now we can fix this though still later in another process we're going to do when we start cleaning things up. But once you get to a certain point where this is starting to look good as far as your initial blend, it's time for the next step, which is to do some standard remove tool to get some of this other stuff just cleaned up. So the best way to do that is to do a complete stamp of these layers by going to the top layer and doing Control Alt Shift E if you're on Windows, or Command Option Shift E if you're on a Mac, and then that gives you one layer. I could turn this on and off, and that's all that I have. So now I've got a combined layer that I can edit. And for instance, this thing down here makes no sense. It's really not a shadow that belongs to anything. So I'm going to use the Remove tool, which I've selected over here, and I'm just going to use the Remove tool on this, and then hit Enter, and that just went away. Now the same thing here, remember we had this little section of concrete over here, didn't quite look right. Well, that can usually be fixed with the Remove tool, so I'm just going to drag that right across there, hit Enter, and see if that fixes it. Yeah, cleaned it up real nice. And then I can do it to other items here as well. So I could grab, for instance, around this barbecue in that bucket, and then did that remove it? Did a pretty good job. Some of these other items here as well to remove them, and these go pretty quick. So just to clean this up, we'll just grab these real quick, And then when that's all done, we've got something that's pretty good to start with. I could even go further, take some of this out here, the plants and all that. Whatever you feel you need to, this is to get you an initial cleanup phase. Now, I want to add some furniture out here, and we'll get to that in just a second. But one of the tougher ones is, what do you do about cleaning up this type of stuff? Now, this is black mold that's been gathered here, typically from rain. Could also be some soot that washed off of there. Either way, this needs to be cleaned up, and you can use, to some degree, on some of the larger areas here, you could use the remove tool. So here at 100%, I'm going to try using the remove tool on some of this and see if it removes it. It's doing a fairly good job removing some of it. Do it in pieces so that you don't really have to worry about it trying to do too much, because that's when it starts overstressing itself on the remove tool and just doesn't do as good of a job. Now, the hard part that we're going to get to is at the top of the chimney. So to get some of this, once we're up to the top of the chimney, and once again, this is looking pretty good compared to where it was before, but up here, there's another trick. Let's duplicate this layer real quick. We'll do Control J or Command J if it's on a Mac. We'll zoom in here just a little bit more. And what I want to do now is select just this area. So a lot of ways to do it. You can use the Quick Select tool, you can use Object Select. If you used Object Select, it's probably going to gather the whole house, but that's still probably okay for what we're going to do here. Now we'll take a brush tool. So taking a brush, and we'll change our flow to 30%. If you know, that's kind of my magic flow. What I'm going to do is sample a color that I like, which is, let's say it's this one here. That's probably what it should be if it were clean. And at this low flow, I can start just tapping in my brush, and you can see, yeah, it is painting, but it's still keeping enough detail because it's at 30%, so it helps clean that up. Now, if I do Control D and deselect that, go back out here, you can see this is what it was before, and this is with it after. So a little bit of cleanup, and I could still do a bunch of other remove tool and things like that to clean it up here, but it's really time to move on to the next step, which is adding some patio furniture. Now, this is going to be a bit of a crapshoot, and you might have to try it a few times because we're going to use generative fill here in Photoshop. What I'm going to do is take the polygon lasso tool, and I'm just going to select an area here, like around this area, so I can just add a little bit of patio furniture. So I'll go up to here, double click, that closed it, and now I can go up to Edit, Generative Fill, and I can describe what I want, and I'll keep it simple. I'll say patio furniture. And then I'll click Generate. It'll go out to the cloud, do its thing, and give me a few different alternatives. Here's one here, here's another one that's over there, here's something here, and this might actually be good. I might like that, and maybe clean up the pillows just a little bit. And there's a lot of other stuff that we can do here as well. I could remove all this down here using, once again, the remove tool. If I needed to edit everything together, I would stamp the layers once again. But this is the basis of it, is that what you would do is, after starting with something that you've edited already, you've done all the exposure blending, you've done all the standard editing, you've got it looking good as best it's going to be for what it would actually present, the next step is to go into Firefly and use that image as a composition reference, describe what it is you're looking for, download one of those images, and then by placing that image into Photoshop and then editing only the portions that we want in there, we can start stamping layers together with those two combined, what came out of Firefly and what we shot, and then we can start cleaning that up. Now, the one that I had worked on is over here, and you can see everything here is pretty much the same as what we just did in this example. That might be cleaned up just a little bit more over there. Now, I would save this as a Photoshop file because you're getting paid extra to do these type of edits. So you want to be able to preserve this so that if there's other edits that they want you to do later, then you can easily do that in your Photoshop file. Once again, this is a concept image. It usually is very safe for use on the listing services, but once you know how to do these type of edits, it's another add-on that you can offer to your customers to show that you are a one-stop shop for doing everything real estate media-wise.